everybody. Thanks for joining us here at the Training, Learning, and Development community. Thanks for joining. Sorry that we're having some technical issues. Theresa can't see me. I suspect no one else can see me either. And let's see. And if you can, or if you can't, just let us know in the chat, just so that I know, because I have been having a heck of a time with this platform lately. So hopefully we'll be able to figure it out. They moved into a whole new different version. And so we've been having these issues. But I'm glad to see there are a bunch of people here. Let me just name off some of the folks that are joining us. Mogda Vazari is here. Ava George. Shelly is here. Nice to see you again, Shelly. Nadia. Liliana Lopez. Ann Spalding is here. Misty Mercedes Pike. Lara. Diane Jones. Oh, and there's Trish W. Oh, you can see me, Diane. Great. Can you see me, Theresa?
No, I can't. So I'm wondering, can they see me? Maybe I just can't see you because we're backstage. I don't know.
Kevin's saying it's all good. I guess they can see maybe the both of us. That's so bizarre. Okay, well, this is something that I can take back to Crowdcast, and hopefully we'll see what happens. Maybe leave and.
Okay, they're saying they can see us both. So
wow,
that's great. It's that's just great. I can't see you, Luis. So. Okay.
All right.
I can hear you.
Excellent. Well, since you can hear me, I have a couple questions, or I have like about 10 questions that I have to ask you, or 10. There are more than 10 questions, I think, in there right now. Maybe somebody added some, but I know that I've had you on this broadcast a couple of times before, right? We've done another showcase. We found out a lot about you. When I came up with questions, I'm asking for things that are a little bit more specific about your background.
Okay.
And Theresa, it is always a pleasure to be able to talk to you. You are so, just engaging and charming and wonderful to talk to. And it's no surprise at all that you're somebody that specializes in story and can speak so well about why story works and business storytelling and all of that. So I have already pasted a couple links to past videos that we've done together. One was, like I said, your showcase, and then another one we did specifically about a storytelling event that we had done for TLDC.
Yes. I got some great feedback from your members on that, by the way. So thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. But let's start it out now. I've got this first question, which is telling us more about your journey into L&D, because it's interesting how you have this really, you have a background in facilitation and L&D, but you also have this absolutely compelling background in business storytelling. How did your background in program management, training, coaching, sales, leadership, how did you get to this point?
Well, Luis, that is a big question, right?
Yeah.
So I'm sure, like many of your audience members, it's like a career that found me. And I'll reverse engineer this, if I may, briefly. I started out in the performing arts, nonprofit arts community, doing social issues outreach theater for young people, using the arts as a vehicle to promote social change and healing. And I got a master's degree in performance from NYU, and I had my own theater company for a while. But, like all people in the arts, and I'm sure you can relate, you have to have a side hustle. You have to have something that pays the bills. Yeah. So I was always in sales. And a lot of times I was in sales management, retail sales, which, I'm really glad that I'm not in retail sales anymore, because boy, has retail changed. And many years ago, I was going back to work after being a stay-at-home mom for 5 years, and I went back to work in retail. And while I was in retail, I got hired immediately on the spot, and then my manager went off to another position, and she took me with her. And she's like, you need to be a sales trainer. I'm like, yeah, I know. So for me, I got into training through retail sales, and I became an education executive for a Fortune 500 company. And then I went on to another Fortune 500 company and another one. And so every time I got into these companies, I would always end up doing training, because either they didn't have a training department, or the training department needed more customization. And so they would come to me, like I was at a customer service team, and they had no trainer, and we needed it. And so I started building training. So that's kind of what happened. And the way I tell people is when I design a training, it's like I'm a playwright because I'm a published author and playwright. My first play ran for 5 years. When I direct trainings or do train the trainer sessions, that's like I'm a director. When I create the whole encompassment, or in other words, the landscape, the project management, what we need to do from an infrastructure standpoint, then I become a producer. And then when I'm up there facilitating, then I'm an actress. So it's got all these different elements, and it all comes back to this role that I've started in ever since I was 6 years old. And I remember telling you that silly story of me on stage as the narrator in Goldilocks and the Three
Yes.
Bears when I had to, bring the story back in alignment. And I've been telling stories ever since. I've been using stories as a way to help people learn and connect and sell their ideas, quite honestly. And that happens through stories.
Wow. So, but let me ask you this one. The first thing that you'd mentioned when I asked you started this question was you'd mentioned you had started teaching the performing arts. That's what, you started
Yeah.
with education kind of first. Was that where it all
Yeah.
began, where you found your love
Yes.
for education then?
Yes. In fact, I was working for the New York City Board of Education, doing, like I said, social issues outreach theater. And I knew that as a performing artist, because I had my own theater company at the time, doing educational theater and social issues theater, especially for young people and at-risk youth, was really in line with my mission,
Mhm.
which is to use stories as a way to help people get unstuck, to figure out who they are, to find a way to learn something new, to change a past story or a past event. And so, especially with my first play, which was called Family Masks, which dealt with the struggle between the masked self and the real self, I knew that theater was a wonderful mechanism to help people learn. And that's really where my career started. And it's been going nonstop ever since, in a way. But we had a big challenge about 5 years ago. Well, everybody did 3 years ago, but 5 years ago, I started Why Story Works after the Fortune 500 company I was with eliminated our entire department, mine included. And so I took my nice severance package and my health benefits, and I said, okay, now's a great time to start out on my own. And then we were going along swimmingly, and about 18 months in, the pandemic hit, and
Mhm.
I lost 90% of my revenue in 90 days. And
Oh,
so we had to pivot or perish. And so that's when we got to work on online trainings and email, how shall I say, webinars, and more the virtual format, which is how you and I met.
yes. Yes,
Yes.
definitely. I mean, did you,
Yeah.
was it really, really different for you, like moving into kind of forcing yourself to get into the virtual space
Oh my
and
God.
consulting the way that you did?
Yes.
Mhm.
Oh, I'm sure your learners could agree. First off, digital is so different from in person. And I was so heavily invested in person learning and in person training because I started out in the theater, and theater is very different from television, as you know, or film. So it really was a mental mind shift. And then I had to find really awesome collaborators to help me with some of the technology. I'm not going to lie to you. I needed to up my game. I needed to up my PowerPoint presentations, my video content. Everything I was doing from a webinar standpoint really needed to be built from the ground up because I didn't have that infrastructure. I was so used to training in person and collaborating with the team in person and working in person on site that I had to really learn new skills like immediately.
Yeah, yeah. So, like, any specifics? Like, what are some specifically some new skills that you learned that have really benefited you?
Well, I had to get really clear on how to collaborate virtually, as I'm sure all of us have in the last
Mhm.
3 years, right? So I had to learn Zoom, I had to learn Trello, I had to learn Slack, I had to
Mhm.
learn Google Share Docs, I had to learn how to present on a virtual platform. I had to reach out to my community that I knew through in person networking and say, well, how am I going to connect with somebody if I've never met them in person?
Mhm.
And so I have friendships and people that I know, you are one of them, that I've never met in person, yet I've done several projects with them. So
Yeah.
that digital flexing was really, and still continues to be hard. But that's where I collaborate. I say no person is an island, and I do best when I work with a team. And that's what was so hard again about the last 3 years. Everything had to go in the cloud. So those virtual connections were so important. And then I had to learn, how do I present virtually?
Mm-hmm.
Because, it's very different, as you know.
Right.
Yeah, I can't see the audience. I don't know what they're thinking. A lot of times as a facilitator, I would catch what the audience was throwing my way through their eyesight or their body language or their engagement. And so I had to find new ways to do that. And I'm still working on it. I mean, it's still hard.
Well, Theresa, I can say you've always been someone to me, presentation wise, extremely engaging. You do an
Oh,
incredible job at it. So,
thank you. Thank
you
you.
you make it look easy. Now, there was something that stuck out to me when I was reading your profile about getting the story straight and how
Yep.
important that is. Can you
Yes.
talk about what that means and what it can mean for an individual or teams, to help them operate with clarity and purpose?
Yes, yes. It is so crucial. First off, when our stories aren't straight, we're out of alignment.
Mhm.
So I would imagine, again, think of your audience. Let's think of our audience right now that's on this meeting right now. We've all been there, right? We've all had a training that maybe has gone a different way, or we're not quite sure what we're doing, or we've taken an assignment and we're like, I need the money, so I'm going to do it. And then it's wonky and it doesn't quite fit. It's like wearing jeans that are 2 sizes too small. You can put them on, but they're not very comfortable. And so being out of alignment, that's what it is. And so I have developed this system, and I know you and I've spoken about it a lot, but those 5 neurological responses inherent in any good story: the fear, the love, the longing, the empathy, and the action. And I talk about that every single time I go out there. And it means flee, right? And if you don't want your audience to flee, or if you don't want to flee from yourself, like run away, you have to pay attention to the stories that are going on in your mind. And sometimes the story that's in your mind is not true. Just like what you said to me, you're like, oh, well, Theresa, I never sense you as not being able to participate and facilitate virtually. That's not something I see, but my internal cop in the head, that story, that fear story, is chattering away. So that's an example of being out of alignment and being hijacked by fear. And so that's a personal thing. The second part to your story is, as a group or as a team, I'll give you a simple sample of, I was doing a training. I'm also a certified Dale Carnegie instructor, and I was facilitating an in-person training. This was right in the middle of COVID, when they had a small little window where we could jump in there. And the training was just going off the rails. And I realized that the person in the audience who was giving me a hard time was out of alignment. They didn't like their job. They hated their job. And we could tell. And they were trying to hijack the whole training because they were out of alignment. So that internal story was, you people don't deserve me. I need a better gig. But she was in that gig. So, understanding that what's happening from a participant level, sometimes as facilitators, we're not in charge of the whole story. We don't know the whole story half the time. We just need to be able to understand where the story is in that current moment, and then figure out a way to deliver what the audience needs to move forward. So I hope I answered your question.
No, you did, and I'm so curious about that. The whole so flee, right? That was the acronym
Right.
that you had just
Right.
mentioned.
Right.
Can you
Yes.
break that down? Like, give it some clarity for me. Like, maybe another example of how maybe, like, say, an instructional designer could potentially, get the story straight using that acronym.
Absolutely. In fact, I don't want to plug another company. I was on but your members might find this interesting. I was on Idol, IDOL,
Yeah.
with Dr. Robin Sargent, and she
Yeah.
was asking the same thing. In fact, I'm going to be doing a training for them. And IDOL stands for Instructional Design Online Learning. I think I probably didn't get the acronym right, but this idea of FLEE is understanding where is your audience at any particular moment, and then design your training to help your audience be at ease. In other words, so they can pay attention and they can get moving. So, for example, if you're doing a new hire training, and you know, what's the first thing any new hire training a lot of times does? Do you know? What do they start off with usually?
I don't know. Why don't we ask the audience? Maybe we can get some.
Let's ask the audience.
Interaction
Hey,
here.
pop in the chat, audience. What are some of the things you see? Okay. We're going to get into flea bites in a minute. I'll do that a little smaller. When you're doing a new hire training, a lot of times they'll start off with the company history. Raise your hand or hit, check mark if you know that that's true. They'll start off with the company history, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Or the company overview, right? And I'm sitting there thinking, well, a new hire, do they really care about the company history, the company overview, Louise? Do they really?
Nah.
Probably not. No. They're wanting love stories. They're wanting to know, did I make the right choice? What's the culture here? Do other people love it? What's my job going to be like?
Mm-hmm.
Or I'm experiencing so much fear, I can't even focus. So if we think about the mnemonic FLEE, F, when you have fear, you can't focus because cortisol is coursing all around your veins and you can't get yourself organized. So you need to slow down and find a way to reduce some of that cortisol so your audience can focus. So fear happens when we're out of alignment, and fear elicits this cortisol, which can hijack our brains. And so then we can't think about anything and we can't learn anything. So if your learner's in fear, you've got to calm them down with stories that are going to eliminate the fear. So maybe you might tell a story or weave into your instructional design, especially in the very beginning for new hires, how other people have overcome fears. What are some of your fears in joining us today? What might you anticipate being what you need downstream to be successful in this position? And then maybe you sprinkle in some love stories. So that's the L in FLEE, love. And love releases dopamine. And dopamine is only in the body for about 90 seconds. So you might need to sprinkle some more dopamine stories in your journey as a learning designer so that you can share the love, especially if you're feeling your audience is depleted. Mm-hmm. The other L is for longing, and that's the serotonin piece. So again, I'm reminded of, learners are really stressed. There's that cognitive load, especially when we're dealing with the virtual space. People get back-to-back meetings. So maybe as an instructional designer, you need to schedule or train or put in there some serotonin stories or just simply some silence or some music. Mm-hmm. Or some thinking and writing time. Mm-hmm. So your audience can catch their breath. So that's the longing. Then there's the E with the empathy. And empathy is that release of oxytocin. So as a facilitator or designer, if you know your audience might be feeling other, or if you want to, let's say, prop a leader up as being more engaging, then maybe you tell some stories that will release oxytocin. And a lot of times those are failure stories. I hate to say it, but that's what happens. It's like, how did I overcome? And they're like, oh yeah, she's just like me. She gets me. And then the last part of the mnemonic is A for action, and that releases adrenaline. And we know as L&D folks, how many times have you done a training and the stakeholders are like, where's the ROI? And you have no idea because you're not tracking the actions that are taken. So many times as L&D folks, we'll spend all our time on the event when we have to do pre-work and post-work. If it's all just about the event, which is maybe 3 hours, how much learning transfer is going to happen in 3 hours? You need that practice. You need the time-phased approach so that your actions can be repeated and repeated and repeated, so it becomes part of your learner's DNA.
Right.
So that's the way I take this idea of FLEE: fear, love, longing, empathy, and action. Cortisol, dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, and adrenaline, and weave it into instructional design. And it's my secret sauce. I talk a lot about it. I always talk about it. Some people get tired of me talking about it. I got published in a book recently called, what's it called? Anatomy of a Book. If you want that, it's on my website. You can go to Amazon, but there's a whole chapter on it. But I just explained it to you. So
Nice.
I
Yeah.
think long time on that, but my apologies.
No, not at all. The one thing that I hear when you talk about that is just how it's establishing connection.
Yes.
You
Yes.
know? And
Yes.
so and we've talked about it before. I know you've mentioned it before and have helped other people understand it in broadcasts we've had before, but about how story establishes that connection.
It does. It does, because stories activate emotion, and emotion propels action.
Mhm.
So learning without action is just self-vanity. Like a L&D without action is a vanity project. Oh, great PowerPoint. Oh, nice job. You know, you get those smile sheets at the end and they're like, hoo-hoo, we loved her. Well, okay, great, but we're all going to go back to the status quo, right?
Mhm.
So sometimes you have to make your learner a little uncomfortable, and you got to push them outside that comfort zone so that they do repeatable things in maybe little micro moments or little mini modules that you can then measure with maybe even self-selecting a survey, or how are you feeling about your, onboarding experience in the first 90 days? What's happening, right? We
Mhm.
can't just do love them and leave them.
Right, right. Well, can you tell us a story about maybe, a challenge that you saw some leaders or teams face and how you using storytelling managed to help them overcome those challenges?
Sure, sure. So I can give you an example of one simple example with a one-on-one, and then one with a group.
Okay.
So I was doing an executive coaching session with a client whom I met through Learnerpalooza, which I'm sure a lot of your members understand or are members of. That's a learning and development community here in the Pacific Northwest. And I had done their trainings and been a coach for them for years. So she bought one of my Kickstarter story packages, which is you get 10 sessions and 2 hours of writing. And she wanted to up her game and get promoted and tell more stories. I'm like, great. So 2 weeks into it, Luis, she's like, I hate my job. I'm like, okay. She's like, I can't stand it. I need a new job, because we started going down, what does she value? So another piece about the story is we're hardwired for them. Humans love them, and we learn through them. And what we learn is what we value. They connect. The values are replayed through the stories we tell and the ones that we remember. So we got to work helping her find a company that was in alignment with her values. We helped her change up her resume. We helped her with her LinkedIn profile. We helped her with her headline. I helped her with her portfolio. I even gave her some ideas on how to do her virtual interview. And within 3 weeks, she had not one, not two, but 3 job offers, making over 6 figures. And,
Wow.
she's happy. So that's the power of story. When you really get in and you start digging in, like, oh my God, I don't really like what I'm doing, or this isn't quite working. How can we get unstuck? What do we need to do? So that's a one-on-one. And that was a really great outcome. I had one that wasn't such a great outcome. People sometimes like to hear those too.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I got news for you. It didn't turn out so well because I think maybe I didn't And this happened really early in my career. I'm going to be very transparent. When I was doing social issues outreach theater for young people in New York City, and I had this mask workshop that I did that was dealing with this dynamics of chemical dependency in the family. We had all the roles seen in family systems theory. We had the scapegoat, the lost child, the family hero, the chemically dependent, the chief enabler, and the team and the mascot. And the team on site did not preset or level set the expectations for the participants. And so I'm out there traipsing around with my masks, and I'm like, okay, here's the activity, which I had done hundreds of times. And one young person in the room took the mask off, threw it on the floor, and said, F you, and walked out. And I'm like, whoa, what just happened? And what happened was, as a trainer, I didn't make the on-site facilitator understand the emotional depths that we were going into. And the person in the audience was not set up for the expectations of what was coming at them. So as L&D folks, we've got to level set expectations so people come in and they know what's happening. We can't just throw them into something. Otherwise, you're going to get pushback. You're going to get people in the fear zone, and no learning happens in the fear zone. So that was a really tough lesson to learn, and I'm really glad that happened. I feel horrible for the young person, but it was because I didn't do my homework, really, and neither did the person who was bringing me in as a guest. And that happens, right? As facilitators, a lot of times if you're an on-site facilitator getting brought in to do work with a team or even virtually, if you don't manage that team, you might not know that team. And so, know your audience, know your audience, know your audience. It goes back to that human connection and knowing your audience and where are they and how can I deliver something that's going to help them, not hurt them.
Right. How important is it for us to all know our own or have an individual story for ourselves to go to?
Wow. Okay. I say not just one individual story. You need to have, there's so many of them, right? You got to have, who am I story? How did I get started? Like your origin story. You got to be able to say, I am A and I help people do X so that they can. That's a story in 20 seconds. So for example, I am a storyteller. I help leaders and learners tell great stories so they can impact their audience to deliver on point and on purpose. That's just a simple little 20-minute story. So people are like, oh, tell me more. And you've got to have stories in your tool belt that you can pop out at any time, especially when you're sensing the audience needs a shift. I say it's like story wardrobing. You know what I mean by that?
No, go ahead.
Okay. So you're a pretty sharp, snappy dresser, right? Even though I can't see you, I recall that from the times we've been together.
I wear the same thing every broadcast, but go ahead.
That's all right. So anyway, think to a point where, let's say, because I spent years in retail and fashion and cosmetics and beauty, and I think I've sold everything there is to sell except vehicles, cars. But anyway, sometimes you need a reboot or a refresh of your story, like it's outdated. You're not going to be wearing, skinny jeans if they're out. You need to know when to move on from a story, when to edit that story, or maybe you just catalog it for another day. Because it's not quite serving you now. I tell people there are 3 golden rules to story. Be real, be relevant, be brief. By God, please be brief.
Yeah. I'm just wondering, because I have there a good part of the TLDC audience, especially in the last couple of years, have been teachers that have, have shifted over to instructional design. And, and that is a huge part of what I do. And what I love doing is hearing about people's stories, but it feels like we tend to sort of just discover them as we have these conversations and showcases like this. Yeah. But I'm just wondering, career-wise, how beneficial it would be to have some of those stories in your story bag, as well as even as a facilitator, being able to pull some of those out to help establish those connections with your audience, like whenever the need comes up. And is that something that you do at all, or
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Like I said, I got my flea bag, right? Fear, love, longing, empathy, and action. And I take those five emotions and I bucket stories in each one of those five buckets. And I try to have 3 stories for each bucket. And I try to tell a story in no more than 2 minutes or less. And I teach people how to do that.
Hmm.
And like I said, fear stories sometimes can be overcoming adversity. I have a love story about how I fell in love with my husband, or how I fell in love with my job, or how I didn't fall in love with it, right? I mean, you can tell a story about anything. The point is you need to connect the dots for the learner. So if you just tell a story to just tell a story, then again, it's a vanity project, right? So
Mhm.
your story has to have a point. You have to tell people what you want them to think, feel, and or do differently as a result of the story you're telling,
Mhm, mhm.
right?
Have you ever run into somebody that's just like, "Ah, all my stories are boring. I can't come up with something,
Oh,
because."
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, people tell me that all the time. Here's my classic one that people say. Oh, Teresa, I don't I'm not in the rear view. I am a forward thinker. I have a growth mindset. And I'm like, "Hey, good for you. And what happened to you today that is story worthy?" There's a great book that I'm reading right now by Matthew Dix. It's called Story Worthy. He's awesome. If you haven't read that book, I highly recommend it. He's like a Moth Grand Slam winner so many times. And,
Mm,
he's also an educator. I think he's a 3rd grade teacher. Plus, he has his own business called Story Worthy. Anyway, Matthew talks about at the end of each night, he does, instead, a lot of people do gratitude journals. He does a story journal. He'll drop down 3 mini little moments that happen to him throughout the day that may be a story worthy moment. And he doesn't write it all out. He'll just put like dog rain underwear. And then he'll know, oh, that's the story about how I got caught in the rain walking my dog in my underwear. And it's a funny story
that's
that
great.
he can then catalog and put that emotional response to it, depending on what the audience needs to hear. He
Mhm,
can make it a love story, a fear story, an action story, adrenaline story, a serotonin story. It really depends on what he needs in that moment of paying attention.
mhm. Oh, I love it. It reminds me of, I used to, go to songwriting conferences, and,
Yes.
I learned once from somebody that, instead of trying to write a song about this whole, experience that you had, just pick 30 seconds from that experience and write about just that.
Yeah.
And, yeah, that.
Yeah. Well, you gotta, it's like the image I like to think of, it's like skipping stones, right? You could skip the stone, like, right? You take a small little rock and it skips over, or you could take a boulder and go deep, right? So again, depending on where your audience is, you might need to go deep, or you might just need to sprinkle it in. Usually in the beginning of a training, I'm not going deep, I'm going to wait for a little while. But you do need to be specific. This is a Tism I say all the time. Specific is terrific. You don't want to be so specific that your audience is like poking their eyeballs out saying, how does this relate to me? But you
Right.
want to be specific enough that you can give those examples, kind of like what you're doing right now with these questions, right?
Yeah, I love it.
The specificity is what's going to drive the story. And you have to have a structure to it. So you don't want to just get up there and be like, well, let me tell you a story about a man named Jim, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
then you're going on, and people are like, oh my God, I can't stand this. Get me out of here. So,
right, right.
um, yeah, there's a formula to it. There's a 2-minute formula that I teach people how to do, and there's a video of that on my website as well.
Love it. Okay, I've got a couple more questions that I can ask you. I was just thinking about those folks that, that might have problems with coming up with a story, or don't think that they're even
Okay.
worthy. But how do you talk about flipping that internal script?
Yeah.
How do you, can you share an example of how you've helped somebody with that?
Yes. Well, I had again, this is an executive coaching client that I had through Learnerpalooza. We were doing, helping her with her job search optimization. And she had recently been let go. from a Fortune 500 company. So she was feeling really low, like, oh my God, do I have any worth? Is there any worth to me at all? And so we had to really reverse engineer and build up her self-confidence again so that she felt that she was worthy, because sometimes it's the stories we tell ourselves that stick us in a place that it's not so healthy. And one way, a simple technique you can use, if you're wondering, how in the heck am I going to tell a story? I have no good stories. I would invite everybody right now in this community right now, to look in your physical space and find an object. Just find any old object that speaks to you. I'm going to find one right now. Okay. So find an object. Okay. You know me, Louise. I always do something interactive and I start telling stories.
Yeah.
So here's an object that I just found that was sitting on my desk. Can you see it?
Yep.
It's a heart. So now I can use this heart to tell a story if I'm having a hard time, right? Coming up with something. I could say, the last 3 years have been really hard on my heart. And I know they've been hard on a lot of people's hearts.
Mm-hmm.
We've had to shutter our businesses. We've had to pivot our intentions. We've lost our learners in the physical world. We're just now coming back. Some of us have lost our jobs. We don't know what's next. And I'm saying, don't give up your heart. The world needs trainers and facilitators and instructional designers that have a heart. It's probably the most important thing you will ever do, which is to keep your heart open and to keep receiving and giving that love to your learners, because we need it. It's been a hard couple of years. So that's a quick example of a simple little story that I could tell to my audience based upon an object.
Oh, I love it. Theresa, that is wonderful. Thank you so much for doing that. Just listening to that, I'm going to probably clip that and share that on LinkedIn or whatever, just
please.
after this is wrapped up. And actually, I think I'm going to end it right there, because that is a great way to end this conversation. And
Mm-hmm.
Theresa, I would love to be able to work again with you and continue to
let's do it. You just raise the hand, say the word. I will be there. I love this community and I love training. When I train, I am in my lane. That I know.
Nice.
And can't see or hear you. Kevin Cochran says he cannot see or hear us. I don't know what that's all about.
Oops. Yeah. That must have been relatively new, because and I wanted to mention that because I know that Theresa, you were just for the folks that came in a little late, Theresa actually can't see me, and you're doing an absolutely amazing job, Theresa, of staring at the camera at somebody that you can't see and remaining engaging and fantastic. So thank you for that. Okay, Cindy's saying it dropped out for a minute, and she had to.
Okay. Okay, so a little refresh. Okay, so that's good. Technology. And again, this is what's so hard sometimes about the virtual space. We're missing that human connection. Right. We're staring at these little boxes and these little white dots. And I'm like, share the love, baby. Share the love, right?
Right.
Those connections are so important, and that's going to happen in stories. And so as instructional designers, we need to keep telling stories and tell real, relevant, brief stories. And if you want help with that, or you've got an instructional design that you're working on and you're not sure where to add the stories or put in the stories, reach out to me. I'm at Theresa@whystoryworks.com. I offer a complimentary 20-minute initial coaching session. I've got a chunk outline on my website you can download. You can do, practice sessions if you want with me. If you got a TED Talk you're working on, and help somebody do that. So just know that you've got this. Everybody's got a story. And your story is the differentiator. That's the only thing you have that's going to make you a standout facilitator that's different from the rest. So trust it, lean into it. You got this.
I love it. Thank you so much, Theresa. I pasted your website link in the chats for anybody that is interested, and I can vouch for Theresa. She is absolutely wonderful, and maybe I'll be reaching out to you soon, Theresa. I'm actually looking to get some voice lessons, but I wouldn't mind some story lessons as well. So.
Oh my gosh, Luis, you're on my calendar. You can go on there, hit the Calendly link, and find me. Let's do it. I want to help you.
All right.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Sorry about the technical issues. Hopefully, I'll get this figured out with Crowdcast, or I'm going to be looking for a new platform soon, just to make sure we can have some consistent broadcasts. But with that, wrapping it up. Don't forget, on Friday, we are meeting with Bobby Losi Vernon, who's going to be talking about the spamming of credentials, which is something that she's coming up, where credentials maybe aren't as valuable as they used to be with some of these, some organizations that are coming up with certificates and things that aren't that great. So join us for that on Friday. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and close it out. See you later, Theresa. Thanks again for putting up with it.
Oh, I love it. It's my pleasure.
Right.
Keep sharing the love. Keep sharing the love.
Thanks.